With Zelda's 40th anniversary year just around the corner and an exciting new interview just being released, which is intriguing a lot of people, there is massive expectation for a big 2026 Zelda blowout, including a major new tentpole title for the series. There is in particular a lot of interest at the moment in the potential of a new MonolithSoft developed Zelda game. In this video, I want to explain where I think we should exert quite a good deal of caution and where I think we should be far more optimistic about our expectations for 2026 and the years beyond. Let's start with the interview which was released on MonolithSoft's website between Daiki Iwamoto of Nintendo and Yasuhiro Fujita of MonolithSoft. The interview is pretty interesting in its own right, but Iwamoto's statement at the end, "I would like Monolith Soft to play a central role as a strong partner in creating the Legend of Zelda series from scratch," has been used to suggest that we might get a ground-up developed Monolith Soft Zelda and a full secondary Zelda team as a result. Now, I've actually said this feels quite likely for a while, and I will link at the end a bigger Zelda deep dive exploring all of this, but fundamentally, what feels like proof to me is not so much what was said, which would also be true of their work on Tears of the Kingdom that they are supporting from the ground up, but who says it. Daiki Iwamoto has been a senior figure in the Zelda group for a long time, and was the director of Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks, Wind Waker HD, and Skyward Sword HD, as well as supervising the design of the Breath of the Wild expansion pass. After Eiji Aonuma and perhaps alongside Hidemaro Fujibayashi, who after all has been directing Zelda since the Capcom games, he has been conspicuously quiet in recent years for a man of his seniority. Now, his presence here is explicable. He is on the board at Monolith Soft, showing the closeness between the two groups. However, the question is, why was Iwamoto specifically chosen to work with Monolith Soft? While Aonuma remains the overall head of Zelda and Fujibayashi is clearly leading the open-air development, I have sometimes observed that Iwamoto appears curiously underutilized in his current credits, which suggests that it is likely that he is supervising something of a more ambitious nature that we haven't yet seen. He might not be the director of the forthcoming project, but it seems likely that he will be heavily involved in it. Monolith Soft has long managed to maintain a cycle of original Xenoblade titles interspersed with remasters with roughly 2.5 years between each. It strikes me that there is every likelihood that this or something on this track will continue, but if Nintendo could find a way to do the same kind of thing with Zelda, then obviously it would be quite exciting, and we'll talk about what these projects might be in a second. In fact, I have some very optimistic interpretations, but first, I just want to pour cold water on the idea of a 2026 big Zelda game. First of all, I really don't expect to hear a great deal from Zelda around the anniversary in February itself, because the Pokemon Company will want the spotlight to be on the 30th anniversary of Pokemon in that period of time. My guess is that Nintendo will follow the model of 2016 and have an anniversary focus in the Direct in September, and that while there'll be exciting stuff for the broader franchise like movie, theme park and merchandising news, the focus in terms of games will be on smaller ventures. There will be plenty of time to do deeper dives into the granular details of the Zelda anniversary, but the key thing here is that I do not expect any sign of a AAA Zelda, even a major remake like Ocarina, in 2026. It's not impossible, of course, because it is the anniversary year and Switch 2 does need a major tentpole title for holiday 2026, besides Gen 10 Pokemon, which, while it will be huge, isn't wholly owned by Nintendo. If we think back to the Switch's second holiday, they had Pokemon Let's Go, Pokemon and Eevee, but also Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, as well as Super Mario Party, which ultimately turned out to be an absolutely massive seller for them, even if it wasn't obvious that it would be quite so huge at the time. So, they will have a big title and a new Zelda. Potentially a full new version of Ocarina of Time would fit the bill. Aonuma has been tacitly teasing this for a while, with mentions of players not knowing about the origins of Rauru, and musing in interviews if people would like more Ocarina of Time, just as he talked about Skyward Sword years before it launched, and talked about developing a game about playing as a thief some years before the announcement of Link's Awakening. I even think there's a reason to believe there's a possibility that this game may well be completed right this moment. So why on earth would Nintendo keep a hold of it? For this, I think we need to consider what their plans are for the movies. In 2023, we had Super Mario Bros., and then we had a game following this up, Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Around the release of the movie, though, the Mario lineup was surprisingly bare bones. Rarely ever does Mario skip a new game in June, but it did in 2023, while 2022 only had the third-party endeavor Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope and the bare bones Mario Strikers Battle League. This might seem counterintuitive. Why would Nintendo dial down their Mario games just as the film hype is bubbling up? But I think we can see the same kind of thing in 2025 and 2026. Sure, there's no shortage of Mario content in the first 12 months of Switch 2. We have Mario Kart World, Super Mario Party Jamboree's Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, Super Mario Galaxy 1+2, Mario Tennis Fever, to say nothing of a Super Mario Bros. Wonder Nintendo Switch 2 Edition due any time in 2026. But while Mario Kart World kind of had to be where it was to lead the Switch 2, I would argue that none of the rest of these are especially massive titles in terms of Nintendo's overall strategy. Tennis Aces perform well on Switch by the standard of Mario sports games, and the Galaxy Duology are huge titles, but not new titles, nor are the Nintendo Switch 2 editions. The strategy, it seems to me, is to sell the new movie audience on all the previously released games. This makes a lot of sense because when you greatly widen your audience, you are including people who have never tried many of your games previously, so you can sell them a lot of content as new. This is a very effective utilization of their back catalogue. But big new titles? Well, once you've had 6 months or so of trying to maximize the sales of your existing library, that's when you pull out the most exciting big new game that fits with the movie. Now, I'll grant you that it's a sample size of one film and game tie-in in order to justify this theory, and I also grant you that it's enormously difficult to reliably time big game releases to sync up with movies. However, Nintendo has one big advantage, which is that they're willing to plan incredibly far in advance and sit on games until the most advantageous moment for them. We'll look into how this might already be in operation for Zelda in a moment, but let's go back to 2023 and Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Now, I love Wonder, but perhaps another 2D Mario isn't considered a maximally hype game in the scheme of things, but given Mario's strong identification with 2D and the fact that it was a Brothers game after a Brothers movie, I think Wonder was the perfect follow-up to the movie. By the same logic, they will probably wait until June to announce their big title for the 2026 holiday season, and yes, I do think the tentpole title for 2026 will be a major Mario, probably a galactic-themed 3D one, but that's not really what this video is about, so much as the implications of this strategy for Zelda. In 2026 and during mid-2027, it's not massively in Nintendo's interest to drop their big Zelda guns. They want people who have never picked up a Zelda game before to pick up Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. They want people who've tried those games to pick up Skyward Sword or Link's Awakening or Echoes of Wisdom, or failing that the Warriors games or even Cadence of Hyrule. They're not short on Zelda material to push. Holiday 2027 though, well, that's the time you want to get out a massive new title so that when those people are just about to retire from Hyrule, they suddenly have the hype new game to get involved with. However, the plan is more complicated than that. Because these films are designed not just to be one-offs, Zelda specifically, they've confirmed is intended to be a trilogy of movies in 2027, 2030, and 2033. So for Nintendo's strategy to work, they would need to have big games in all of these years. But they don't want to have the same experiences after each movie. They need to have different and ideally grander games each time. In the case of Mario, my strong suspicion is that 2026's game will be a course-based 3D experience which would fit with the galaxy theming of the movie. However, when the third movie comes, which I'm not sure given the strong evidence of imminent spin-offs, will be in 3 years, like the previous movie followed after 3 years, I would expect the other type of 3D Mario, according to their internal classification of games released around the launch of Odyssey, i.e. a sandbox Mario, probably the most open world yet, if Bowser's Fury was a prototype in this direction. How EPD8 will pull this off is a separate topic that I've covered before, but if you want to look at the most logical progression of Mario experiences designed to draw new players in and give them a succession of ever more ambitious games following the films, it will be 2D, course-based 3D, and then sandbox 3D. And this, I think, is what Nintendo may be going for. For Zelda, though, it's a little different, and there are more different options. Option 1 would be a replica of the Mario format. They start with a top-down Zelda, move to a linear Zelda, and end with a full open-air experience. While it's not the likeliest option for me, I think there is some reason to think they might find this advantageous. They know that a significant chunk of their audience will have a nostalgic affection for A Link to the Past, or else a knowledge of that game's iconic status. They also have released 2 consecutive games using the capsule toy aesthetic for 2D Zelda, and these titles have sold respectably. But if they want to bolster top-down Zelda into the big time, they might want to try a Metroid Dread approach. Dread would often shift seamlessly between major 3D cutscenes and traditional side-scrolling action. Imagine a version of A Link to the Past or even an original game which imbibed this philosophy. Not only would it be hugely exciting to fans, but I think movie audiences would find it compelling as well. Rezo's 3DS port group or the Luigi's Mansion 2 Tantalus port group could handle A Link Between Worlds for 2026, and then in 2027, some kind of partnership between the Grezzo, Echoes of Wisdom team, and Monolith Soft could deliver A Link to the Past for Switch 2. Following this up with an Ocarina of Time remake in 2030 and a full original game from the Fujibayashi Group in 2023, and you have a grand succession of Zelda experiences. Option 2 would be to double down on the trilogy format. The Hero of Time games already have 3 clear major titles in Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Twilight Princess. It would be an obvious succession to put these into 3D, and it would be achievable to produce these titles too. Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess are both set in Hyrule, and while the maps are different, there's certainly the potential, if they're trying to make a larger world of Hyrule, that they could find ways to adapt this into something that encompasses both. Where this falls down a bit for me is Majora's Mask. Love Majora's Mask as I do, it's a wacky idea for a film. A time travel mechanic, a light world and dark world, or a Twilight situation, well, both of these feels like the kind of thing that they will want to explore in movies. I would absolutely love to see a Majora's Mask movie, but it feels like the kind of thing you do for Zelda 4 when you've hit every big note and you need an experimental palette cleanser, and where the claustrophobic location keeps the budget low, given that the leads of the film at this time will be far more expensive. Then again, if they do an Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess, a third game could easily be an original title in the Heroes of Time succession. Or, of course, that next open-air Zelda, which I don't anticipate until at least 2030 or so. This also follows a far more logical progression for the films. Ocarina of Time deals with Child Link, Twilight Princess introduces the idea of parallel worlds. You can see how these would make effective models for films, potentially with the third dealing with the third theme that we sometimes see, the aftermath of some kind of cataclysm. I think option 1 has some advantages in terms of showcasing a greater variety of Zelda experiences and driving people towards Nintendo's top-down Zelda line of games, which are easier to produce at a lower cost and therefore have an important place for Nintendo in Zelda's future, even if they haven't historically been the very top-selling. However, on balance, I think we're looking at something closer to option 2. I would personally think Ocarina, Twilight Princess, and either an open-air game that uses the same character models, or even a brand new game in the same line, would be the likeliest options. I've speculated before that a major focus for Nintendo in this era seems to be animatable faces and expressions. Look at Mario Kart and Donkey Kong, and this has to be a major requirement for a new Zelda game to show improvement over the wild titles. Fujibayashi's wild games don't really focus on this aspect, and it would be as well for him to inherit this when he has his new game and is ready to stand on his own 2 feet, rather than have to develop these aspects from scratch, which don't seem particularly to be things he's focused on. The question is then, how is all this achievable on Zelda's budget? For this, I'd like to shout out a recent video by Andres Restart, which convincingly posited that a 2017 job advertisement for a Monolith Soft developed action game, a third pillar in their recruitment, besides the Xenoblade and Zelda support teams, could in fact be for a Monolith Soft Zelda. If this is true, and they've been recruiting for Monolith Soft Zelda since 2017, several big questions arise. What happened to that game? Why hasn't it released? Would a remake of Ocarina really be an 8 or 9 year project, or does the scale suggest something new? To unpick this, let's put ourselves into Nintendo's shoes, not as they are now, but as they were back in 2017. Breath of the Wild had been a huge success. When something's a success, what do? you make more. And so the core Zelda team was working busily on DLC. Eventually, this DLC was spun off into an original game, a full Breath of the Wild sequel for the late Switch era, but that wasn't Plan A. Presumably, with Plan A, the group would have tried to repeat their winning formula from Switch with Switch 2 and launch with both a major Zelda title and a major Mario Kart experience, which meant that while the initial recruitment for MonolithSoft's games was being conducted, Nintendo had a gap for a major Zelda game in their schedule for the late Switch era. They needed something for the early 2020s and perhaps specifically for 2021, which was to be the launch of their mid-gen hardware and potentially a showcase for more than just an OLED screen if the intention was to do a new 3DS-style power bump, which must have at least been considered. Sometime in probably 2018 or 2019, the plan clearly changed. Certainly before June 2019, when they announced that a full sequel to Breath of the Wild was in development, they decided that Tears of the Kingdom would be a full game, and ultimately it hit in the late Switch era. The Monolith Soft project would therefore be surplus to requirements. They didn't want two such major projects crowding each other out in a fixed period, although perhaps if Tears of the Kingdom hadn't ended up being delayed until 2023, they might have found a use for the Monolith Soft project around 2021. Instead, my hunch is that the game had the tea table turned on it, a famous expression often used in Nintendo for a major change to a project. By around 2021, when the project was 3 or 4 years in, it would be too late to launch a major new title. Even though there was to be a gap in 2022, Tears of the Kingdom needed the hype cycle. Adding an extra Zelda in would just have complicated matters. The most logical next spot at this point would probably have been as a launch game for the Switch 2, a far more graphically ambitious project that would really push the new console to big heights. However, in 2023, we had the launch of the Mario movie. Its success evidently spurred Nintendo to double down on their movie strategy, and a deal for a Zelda was hammered out in the November of that year. By that stage, if my theory about the way they use the movies to push games at particular times is correct, they would now have the challenge of finding three major games in 2027, 2030, and 2033, when their last mainline Zelda had taken more than 6 years. However, if Ocarina was basically ready for Switch 2 by 2023, this would give the team 7 years to work on its sequel. And it would also free up the Fujibayashi team from the pressure of needing to deliver as soon as possible. We know that Fujibayashi was quite relaxed about the whole thing because in interviews for Tears of the Kingdom, he mentioned that he hadn't even told Aonuma yet what his ideas for the next title were. Now, we know that Nintendo sit on titles for a long time. Due to leaks such as rating board certification dates, we've seen titles like Fire Emblem Engage and Metroid Prime Remastered, which were reportedly mostly completed months or years ahead of their eventual release. But this is a whole other world of forward planning. Nevertheless, I do think it's plausible. Firstly, these films are a major opportunity for Nintendo. You only get one time to do the first big Zelda film, and it's an event they'll want to leverage in a major way. Secondly, they really didn't need to drive demand for the Switch during the early 2020s. Demand was high through the pandemic and only trailed off slowly, and Tears of the Kingdom and the Mario movie both drove huge demand that they could only barely keep up with, given the initial problems around the 2020s of supply of chips. Nintendo's terror must be to repeat a Wii U situation, where the successor console fails to gain sufficient traction and all of their hard-won progress is lost. The best guarantee against this is to have a long-term plan in mind. Clearly, if things ever went badly, Nintendo can always drop these games early, but with patience, if they get their timing right, the rewards may be far more substantial. My take, therefore, is that I think in September 2026, we will get news of lots of cool anniversary stuff, including perhaps things like a Switch and Switch 2 version of Link Between Worlds, possibly some kind of Zelda spin-off, possibly even a Twilight Princess HD port if they have a different plan in mind for the 2030 game. Now, I speculated before about the potential for Wii Music and Ring Fit Adventure to be remade in the Zelda universe, and I suspect these kinds of casual-focused projects may be more ideally placed in the lead-up to a film, but in general, the Zelda game content will be on the lower end of the hype meter for most hardcore fans. Sure, film, theme park merch, all of that will get people excited. However, I expect we won't see a major Zelda project before 2027. probably not until June 2027 for an announcement to be specific, although since the film has been delayed into May, they may prefer to wait until July that year to try to give themselves an extra few weeks to sell the stock of their existing library before announcing the next thing. However, I would expect us to see something in October or November of 2027, and I think an Ocarina remake remains the leading candidate just from our numerous teasers. Even if it's not from Monolith Soft, there's also the Tantalus Zelda team who worked on Twilight Princess HD and Skyward Sword HD, and whose top development groups haven't received recent credits, which suggests that they're working on something new, probably for Nintendo. Remember, Iwamoto also supervised Tantalus on Skyward Sword HD, and Nintendo seems to trust them because a different Tantalus group was tasked with Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. The Luigi team would make sense to task with a different 3DS port, specifically A Link Between Worlds, but the core team could also be great assets. Who knows, if Monolith Soft already have a working version of Ocarina and are planning something brand new, perhaps Tantalus could be returning to Twilight Princess or even developing Majora's Mask. At any rate, I would expect a new game of similar or greater scale to be already well underway for 2030, probably featuring a light and a dark world in some form, if that is going to be the way that that second movie takes. Of course, this is all pretty crazy stuff, and there's a lot of wild supposition here. On this channel, I like to make these kinds of forecasts accountable by giving percentage figures to the likelihood of anything I say, so that it's possible to look back and review how accurate or how wide of the mark I was. The next such video, reviewing my past performance, is coming very soon actually. When I make these calls, my aim isn't to nail extreme long shot specifics, which is basically impossible, but in general, my aim is that my 50% calls are right 50% of the time, my 70% calls are right 70% of the time, and so on. It's not that these percentages are mathematically derived from some deep algorithmic formula, it's just that it's a useful way in order to keep track and to judge how accurate I'm being, and therefore to adjust my antenna over time. Therefore, let's make some calls now. 90%, I think Zelda will have a big anniversary focus during the calendar year 2026. Now, they barely mentioned in 2021, but the 40th is a big deal, and I think that's pretty much locked in. 90%, I think we will see the announcement in 2026 of a Zelda theme park area. We've already seen images of Aonuma in a hard hat over there, so I think it's just a matter of time. 50%, I think the Zelda anniversary announcements will take place in September. June would also make some sense, as well as obviously February, which is the actual anniversary, but I think the strongest single likelihood is September, when they can drive merchandising around the holiday season. 70%, there will be no major AAA Zelda game announced in the Zelda Anniversary Direct, such as either a new open air or a major scale remounting of Ocarina. 50%, I expect there to be some kind of spin-off title or tie-in, possibly including a mobile game to launch prior to the movie release. 70%, I think we will see a Zelda game primarily developed by Monolith Soft release by the end of 2027, and if there is one, I would give a 90% chance that Daiki Iwamoto is either supervising, directing, or else credited in a senior role, i.e. more than just special thanks. 70%, I think we will see Ocarina of Time by the end of 2027, even if it's from a different group, such as Tantalus. 30%, I think we will see the next big Zelda, specifically in the holiday quarter of 2027. 70%, I think we will see Tantalus credited on another Zelda game by the end of 2029. 30%, I think we will see A Link Between Worlds release by the end of 2027. It feels like a low-hanging fruit, and I also could see it having been commissioned as a Switch 1 title prior to their decision in late 2025 to pivot development away from Switch 1 going forward. And 10%, I think we will see a new version of either Phantom Hourglass or Spirit Tracks, though I wouldn't rule out a Nintendo Classics DS version in that time frame. My feeling is if they wanted to push Toon Link, they had a ready-made opportunity with Wind Waker and they didn't. So unfortunately, I think those games currently remain quite a long shot, although in the future they may take a different tack. Do check back soon for more deep dives, including a full deep dive on Nintendo's producers and my review of previous forecasts, as well as several other pretty interesting videos for Nintendo. There's lots of stuff on the Patreon if you'd like to check that out. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo forecast.